Thank you, Ria. Good afternoon and welcome everybody to this Pearson Edexcel Summer 2021 Assessment Series update. We have a lot of colleagues at this event, so I would like to request that you make a note of any questions during the first chunk of the presentation at least, and we will answer them when we open up the presentation to Q&A, as your questions may well be answered during the presentation and during the subject-specific FAQs. And these slides will be made available after the event anyway. The agenda for today, we will take a look at the dates and deadlines that are key to your planning this term, the support that we have to offer generally to all subjects at this time, and then in later slides, the support specifically created for art and design. In the first part of this event, the slides are generic, and you will see that the agenda mentions UK and international qualifications. So I should mention here that the guidance for all of our art and design qualifications, the GCSE, international GCSE, and A-level, the advice is the same. Assessment materials are available, including new exemplars, pre-recorded standardization training, and exemplified grading descriptors. Please bear with this generic section of the event and save up any questions you may have until after the subject-specific FAQs. Students will receive grades awarded by their teachers on what they've been taught. There isn't an algorithm this year, and teachers will draw upon a range of evidence. For art and design, this could be mocks, coursework, workshops, etc. We have, like all the exam boards, provided guidance on our website, and you will be directed to this in later slides. Your grades must be with us by the 18th of June, and the system will be available around the 26th of May. Results days are GCSE 10th of August, and for the A-level, the 12th of August. Here's a timeline of the communications that have been shared with centres in the 2 months that have just passed and beyond. It includes Jcq grade descriptors, additional exemplar materials, grading exemplifications, and pre-recorded standardization training. You'll be advised soon on how to submit the grades from the 26th of May up until the 18th of June. We're just going to quickly go through the Jcq guidance. Jcq released guidance on determining grades, and this is discussed a bit later on. This should be used in conjunction with your art and design assessment grid to help you to place the learners in the correct band and to be able to confidently apply a grade. There are a number of documents on the Jcq website that are downloadable for use by centres, heads of centre and heads of department. We have shared the links on our website, and the following slides summarise some of the key details. The quality assurance process is a three-stage process. The completion of a centre policy. Virtual centre visits will be conducted where centre policy indicates that further support and guidance might be required, and targeted and random sampling by exam boards of centre policies and the evidence underpinning submitted grades, again by virtual visits. This means that any of your centre's learner evidence could be requested for sampling. There's more information on this in further slides, so don't worry about this in particular for now. The quality assurance process has internal and external elements. Internal quality assurance centre policy. Every centre must produce this, and they could adopt the pre-populated template for ease of completion. Only one policy per centre needs to be completed, as it is an overarching document that covers all of the quality assurance activities in the centre. It should provide a summary of the centre's approach to assessment and quality assuring the teacher-determined grades awarded based upon the evidence that they've produced. This must be completed and uploaded by the 30th of April 2021. Heads of centre will ensure that students have had the opportunity to demonstrate the full breadth of their knowledge and understanding based on what they've been taught. which is why we're encouraging that in this period up to the end of May, that learners are being encouraged to develop their earlier ideas and development work to produce fully realised bodies of work. It is important that the grade represents a holistic and objective judgment based upon each student's performance. The evidence should be consistent where possible, but it doesn't need to be the exact same project, provided that it is still an art and design project, where learners follow a creative work journey using the art and design processes in order to produce ideas and realise outcomes. In art and design, some learners may have missed different projects due to COVID, so it's understandable that the evidence will not always be the same, will not always be for the same project, but it will be for the same type of work in general. This work would be comprised of a variety of types of work, such as practical workshops, research activities, development of ideas, and experimentation with media, the review of ideas and development of prototypes or visuals, and the presentation of design visuals or physical outcomes. And there are further support guides on the website. We have produced grading exemplification for art and design that can be used with the assessment grid and the evidence that your students have produced to help you confidently place the learners in each of the levels, and assign a grade. There are links to all of that support in further slides. Grade descriptors and exemplification documents have been created for GCSE and A-levels and were made available on the 19th of April. The examiners have used historical responses from which to illustrate performance at grade levels from previous series and gives examples of the standards. For art and design, there are exemplar materials so that you can see visually what these descriptors look like in practice. For A-level, descriptors and exemplifications have been created for grades A star, A, B, C, D, E and U, and at GCSE for grades 8, 6, 5, 4 and 2. In previous years, centres have used data to provide target grades or predicted grades based upon assessments and data modelling. This year, the policy direction is that the final grade is derived solely based on the performance evidence produced by students. The grade based on predicted or target grade is not permitted. Historical data at the centre is sometimes used as a final check that can inform teachers' professional judgment. For example, looking at examples of work that have been assessed and graded and archived for standardisation purposes, or simply looking at previous grades profiles. However, this may not always be accurate since centres do undergo changes year on year, for better or for worse. You will not be held to account for any difference to previous years, and this data should only be considered after your grading judgments have been made, so that you are able to make a comparative judgment. We have some assessment support materials, and you can refer to the Principal Examiner's Report from 2017-19 for the A-level and 2018 to 2019 for the GCSE to help you. In addition, we have created some new exemplar materials and the grading exemplification I've already mentioned. And if you haven't seen these already, we have some standardisation training that are pre-recorded video presentations by the chief examiners, and there are links to these as well later in the presentation. This slide refers to the support for the academic subjects, so please ignore any references to questions or range of papers. Although if you've been doing a mock, you can use any of our past externally set assignments for this, and they are available on the website in the usual place under external assessments. And we do have marked exemplars of student work as stated on this slide, and many are new examples that you may not have seen. Special Educational Needs Coordinators, or SENCOs, SEND leaders and assessors, have previously been advised to continue to process online applications as if exams were taking place this summer, to formalise the assessment arrangements for these learners and ensure consistency with the Equality Act 2010. Modification of the additional assessment materials really relates to the academic subjects, as our additional materials for art and design take the same format as they always have, and centres are able to make their own arrangements for SEN learners using what is known as normal way of working protocols, and that is in the Jcq document, which mean that these learners may take assessments or mocks in the same way that they would under normal circumstances. That is to say, the way that they work when they do their coursework with you, whether that's with an assistant or with a scribe or any other things that they have in their normal way of working, so that they're not put at a greater disadvantage this year. This year, the arrangements for awarding grades to students in 2021 are aimed at ensuring fairness and consistency. You may share information with learners about the evidence that you're using as part of the grade determination process for art and design. This is fairly straightforward, since it will be their personal portfolio. It should be made clear to them that you are not looking anywhere else for evidence, such as performance in SATs, etc., so that the message they take home is clear that there are no algorithms involved. It is just evidence-based grading. You cannot share their marks or grades with them or their parents or carers. If you share a mark, please be aware that they could get hold of the grades boundaries fairly easily and speculate about this before the results are issued. If centres do identify any errors, they can submit a revised grade with a rationale to be considered by the exam board. If they are satisfied, they will issue a revised grade. Students can appeal their grade if they think an error has been made post-results, but they must do this through the centre, who will submit the student's appeal. They must also provide the evidence upon which the grade judgment had been made, and the exam board will consider whether, in its view, the grade reflected an appropriate judgment. If the exam board judges that it did not, they will determine the grade that the evidence would support, and would also check that the centre had followed its own process. I'm going to move on to the subject-specific information. So here I have some frequently asked questions that I've received in the last few months in regard to art and design. These may answer some of your questions when we get to the end of them. If they haven't answered your questions, you can put some more in the chat. Do we still have to send work for moderation this year? We did tell exams officers at the beginning of March, after the government announcement, that there's no longer a requirement for art and design work to be submitted for moderation this year. Instead, we're asking for teachers to assess and mark the work and then submit us a qualification outcome, or a teacher-assessed grade. You probably know it now as a tag, by 18th of June. What is the purpose of random sampling? For general qualifications, each centre is required to put in place an internal quality assurance process, which we spoke about in the previous slides, including internal standardisation of marking and grading judgments, which will be checked by exam boards. That is the policy, not necessarily all of your internal standardisation, so I don't want you to worry there. Exam boards will also conduct their own external quality assurance process through a combination of random sampling of the evidence used to support teacher grades and more targeted scrutiny where there identify cause for concern. Do I still have to digitise work for random sampling this year? Earlier in the year, you were asked from September time, I believe it was, to digitise all of your learner work, because it would have to be in that format for us to do the moderation sampling. Then after the announcement early in the year, that changed, so it was no longer a requirement. However, you might be asked for the evidence, so it's a good idea to get your learners to digitise their own work. It's also useful for their personal progression purposes. However, if it's not been possible, because of issues with the hardware that students might need to do that, then work could be digitised when it's requested, or in another scenario might be postal submission. Either way, you should hold on to the evidence that you've used for your tags this year. Do I have to set a mock exam this year for the tags? We are expecting that teachers will continue to support students in the completion of work to provide evidence for the tags. And we expect that work will be graded using the exemplified assessment criteria, the assessment grid and the standardisation materials to ascertain the levels at which students are working, and which can still be seen in less evidence than in previous years. But whilst it's not mandatory to set a mark, if you do still need further evidence, then you may need to set one between now and the middle of or late May, so you're able to confidently give evidence-based grades to us by the 18th of June. Can we use past grade boundaries to help us translate our marks to grades? Yes, you can. The notional component grade boundaries for 2019, component 1 only, would be the most appropriate to use to support your grading. In 2020, it was a different type of assessment, and it was just the external unit. However, it is advisable to use the descriptors on the assessment marking grid, exemplified grading guidance, exemplars and standardization materials to accurately establish the characteristics before attributing levels, marks, and then to a grade. There are links here to the notional component boundaries for June 2019. Where is the standardization training? So I have mentioned the standardization training before, and here is a link to the A-level and the GCSE standardization training. These are videos created by the assessment team with the chief examiner taking you carefully through some examples of different levels of exemplar work, and talking about how the work that you see relates to the exemplar, the grade descriptors. And they have been uploaded, the latest exemplar materials have been uploaded to the links that you see on that slide. Will there be any changes in the marks available for component 1 in the art and design qualifications? No, the marks available for component 1 in GCSE, international GCSE and A-level will remain the same and can be assessed in the same way as you do in normal years by the teacher assessor. What is the weighting of the A-level personal study in the summer 2021 series? As component 1 has been restructured to take place over 2 years and form the entire candidate submission, you're being asked to assess the entire body of work holistically. For this exercise, you must consider the personal study as just another piece of evidence contributing to the whole. Individual weighting of any particular element, including the personal study, is not applied. As with any other piece of sustained work in the candidate's portfolio of evidence, the personal study will simply be another aspect contributing to your final judgment. So basically, you're still assessing that work against the AOs, and it is normally assessed against all of the AOs anyway. So that's no change really. We haven't been able to enable learners to produce final outcomes this year should we assess AO4. The Jcq guidelines mean that not all subject content you might normally have been able to deliver will have been able to be taught this year. However, you may still be able to enable your learners, to finish at least one project that requires an outcome, even if this is a 2D or 3D visualization, and this may cover all of the AOs. The Jcq grade descriptors include references to the realization of ideas, which are essentially project outcomes as shown in their document, and I've put links to those in the slides as well. So, for example, the grade descriptor for outcomes from the A-level document says, present personal and meaningful responses, imaginatively realizing intentions and making convincing connections between visual and, where appropriate, written and other elements. So this doesn't mean that those responses have to be physical artifacts produced using high levels of technology. And likewise, the grades 4 and 5 descriptors from the GCSE document both mention realizing personal ideas. So again, you needn't think that this has to be some sort of highly polished outcome that you might have been able to produce in previous years with all of the technology you have at your disposal. The Dfe Guidance states that each grade for a subject must be signed off by at least 2 teachers in that subject, one of whom should be the head of department or subject lead. Does this mean, as head of department, I need to mark all of the GCSE projects in addition to the class teacher? If you have a larger number of candidates and you're head of department, then there are likely to be other teachers of sufficient assessment experience in your team who are able to apply grades. You can sample some of their decisions, and if you're happy with their marking and grading, that they're marking fairly and to the standard, you can sign them off without remarking the work. The document is simply asking for confirmation that a single teacher hasn't been responsible for all of the grading decisions, with no other mechanism in place that will lessen unconscious bias or unfair decisions. Do we need students to sign authentication sheets? Yes, you should follow all normal administrative processes in respect of standardisation and of asking learners to sign that all evidence that they have put forward for you to mark is their own. If we ask for any of your learner work in the random sampling for quality assurance purposes, then the same paperwork would be required as would have been if we'd moderated in a normal year. How do I get to the summer 2021 materials on the website for each qualification? There's just a brief visual here of with a link. So if you go to the subject page of that link, there is a menu down the right-hand side with blue bars. So if you want A-level, you'll just click on the A-level menu and you'll see A-level Art and Design 2015 with History of Art 2017. So obviously you'll click on the link for Art and Design. And then when you get to that page, you'll see on the right-hand side a blue panel with course materials, and the Summer 2021 guidance is at the Teaching and Learning Materials link at the bottom. So we have further support and training sessions and more will be made available via the Pearson Professional Development Academy. There are already some materials in there that can teach you about quality assurance and unconscious bias. There are downloadable guides, videos, and pre-recorded and live events. For art and design, those would be the ones that are also on the Training from Pearson site, but there are links actually to those. So if you haven't got time to sign up to this, the links to our standardisation training are in the slides. And again, our full subject support guides can be found on our 2021 support page. There's helpful information on the Ofqual website, and you can receive regular qualification updates through our Pearson Qualifications Bulletin. We have support for students, parents and carers. So if you know of any your students or parents or carers that would be interested, you can direct them to these links. There's a video and a letter from our Assessment Director, Hayley White, explaining how the students' grades will be determined so that you can they can have a better understanding of how you're applying the grades and the elements of fairness within this. A link to the student timeline for summer 2021. There's a feedback form, so if any of them need to get in touch to access further help and support, and a link to the Ofqual infographic that explains visually how grades will be awarded this summer. And if they wish to, the Parents and Carers newsletter, they can sign up to receive the latest information and support. So that's that for the presentation. I'm just going to have a look at the Q&A. What are the key differences and similarities between the exemplar materials and the grade exemplification documents? Well, the key difference is the exemplar materials are visual exemplars of student work with a commentary by the examiner, by the chief examiner, and a mark, so it will show whether they're a high mark or a low mark. The grade exemplification documents are exemplified grade descriptors. So if you take your assessment grid and look at the descriptors on there, the grade exemplification documents have been done by our chief examiners to try and match very carefully the descriptors that match to the Jcq grade exemplification guidance. So it's really our version, the art and design version of the Jcq exemplification of grades, so that you can more easily pick out the words, the descriptors that apply to art and design. There is only one art teacher at our school. Can the art teaching assistant assist with the marking and be counted as the second teacher? Not usually, unless they're a qualified teacher who understands and has marked before, has experience of marking. So you don't need to have a second teacher. You should do the marking yourself, and you should get try and find somebody else in the school with some experience of marking to take a look at the grade profiles. But unless your TA is a teacher, they can't do that. I was told that we would be receiving a conversion table to translate our numerical marks to grades. For art and design, there is no conversion table. You must, well, if you've gotten to the point where you have numerical marks, then you would look at the 2019 grade boundaries. The most important thing is that you properly get your idea of the mark, rather than worrying about a conversion table. The important thing is to look at the work in front of you with the exemplar materials and the assessment grid and the exemplification of grades. If we had reduced time, can we assess what there is as if it was a greater quantity without penalising students? No. Dfe Ofqual have said this year that you must assess what you see in terms of quality and against the descriptors. There's still some time if there are bits missing of the type of work that you need to see, like possibly outcomes or finished ideas. You have, till the end of May probably for that, because the deadline for the submission of tags is 18th of June. So you cannot predict a grade. You cannot say what might have been. CAGs last year were on that basis, because there was a lockdown from the 20th of March to the end of July, so students weren't actually able to do any more. So CAGs were where you had to predict what they might have been able to do given time in the examination. This year it is evidence-based. If all of our students have digital portfolios, can they take their work home when they leave school? Yes, they can do that, as long as you have copies of the digital portfolios, because if in random sampling we did require, or if students had made an appeal, you would need to have a digital portfolio to provide to the exam board, the evidence to support that appeal. If we haven't been able to do a final piece, can we just mark AO1, 2 and 3? As I've just said earlier, the final piece, so if when you see the slides again, the final piece can be a visualization, and it has to show something in respect of students justifying their ideas as a final outcome. So it could be a visualization of what they're going to do. So if they're doing pots and they haven't been able to do pots, they can do just a really good finished visual of those pots. Likewise, if they were going to make a dress, they could have a visualization board of their show, of the pieces in their show. So you should find evidence for all of the AOs in the work that they've done in the past 2 years. In the documentation I've read, it says that if a student doesn't finish a final piece but has solid prep, we can still reward what you see. You can still reward what you see, but you do have a month left to try and get your students to complete any of the projects in their portfolio, as a visualization so that you know what the intention was, because it's not, or take a look at how they have created something in the past 2 years based on their preparatory work. So it doesn't necessarily have to come from an incomplete project. This could be that you want to see if they're able to finish work and how that relates to their research and to their development. I'm sorry, these are coming in thick and fast, so I'm not even sure how many of which ones I've done and which ones I haven't, because there are hundreds of you. So if you wouldn't just mind, yours will be marked and done soon. Some pupils have been online for basically their entire project and haven't had access to the same media as pupils in school full time. Is there a leniency for these pupils? Their grading could look incredibly low in comparison to pupils in schools. Again, you should not be marking in respect of whether they've had, done their work online or used different media. It has to be, the assessment objectives are basically clear about the students' intentions, their ideas, and how they take those ideas forward, and about the evidence. The current guidance from Ofqual is that leniency in those kind of terms are not pertinent to this year's grading. It is evidence-based. Our school wants final grades by the 21st of May. So we'll be marking from 7th of May onwards, so we don't have time to do any more work. Then I suggest that you have a word with your SMT to say that for art and design work, it has been incredibly difficult this year, and that by having to do final marks by 21st of May, it would seriously impact on your students' ability to have a fair grading process applied, because we haven't put this deadline in. So by foreshortening it, that's not helping much. So you could have a word with your line manager or your senior management team. If they've done a 3-year course, can they use work from year 9? They can use work from any part of their course. Excuse me a moment. Gosia, could you go through the chat and click any as answered that I have answered, because all I can see is a lot of questions.
I'm trying to do that, yes. It's just
thank you, because I'm just forgetting to click that. Do centres need to have assigned marks for AOs for the sampling process, or can an overall grade be awarded? You should assign marks for your AOs as you would normally. There's nothing to do with the sampling process. Within your centre, you may not be sampled, but in order to come to your grades, you can't pluck those out of the air. They will have to come from a marking process. That's how you do it in art and design. It's not speculative. As I said, it's evidence-based. So you need to look at that work, look at the exemplars, look at the exemplification of grades, and look at the 2019 grade boundaries. But use your assessment grid as you would normally. You know, this is something you've done every year. Do the same thing, come up with the mark, and then you can apply a grade. You can't do one thing without the other. The answer to dropping AO4, is it a definite no? As I said, AO4 is often thought of as a finished, polished piece done in some sort of fancy piece of kit. Please just try to get your learners to give you some idea of what their final piece would have been in the next few weeks. That is it's very important that they haven't just done research, had some ideas, done a bit of experimentation, and you have no idea what they would have done with that. So, even if it's a sketch, even if it's a finished visual, that's kind of the end of the story. It's like reading something and not knowing the ending. Of course, you can only ever mark on what you see, but you know, if the intention's fairly clear within the development work, then fine, you know, because sometimes in development work, students show an outcome. There will be an almost developed, finished outcome, because normally when they do the exam, they will have a near as perfect outcome that they will then recreate in the final time session. So some students will have the notion of their final outcome in that development work. Others might not be showing anything as to their intentions. So for those learners, you need to at least find out what their intentions are, and even if it's not fully formed, but the idea should be there, that it would be had they got a chance to complete it. So if it's a dress, then you want to see a nice drawing of what that is like. And as I said, I think there's sufficient time to get any learners onto that who have not got an AO4. And as I said, AO4 isn't a thing. AO4 also has elements of AO3, you know, review and evaluation. When they got to their final idea, were they happy with that? What did they think of it? What would they have done differently? It should reflect their research, so there are elements of AO1. So as I said, AO4 is not a thing. All of the grades are holistic. The 2019 notional boundaries are very different from the Jcq descriptors. How do these relate? It doesn't seem fair to use these. Do you mean it doesn't seem fair to use the Jcq descriptors or the notional grade boundaries? The grade boundaries have no descriptors on them. They are just numbers. So they are the notional grade boundaries for 2019 tell you what marks gave what grade. And that is helpful to you once you've gotten your marks. You can use whatever descriptors you like, but I suggest you stick with your assessment grid and then use the Chief Examiner's exemplification of grades from our website. The Jcq descriptors, don't forget, are created by all of the exam boards, and they may not sound very familiar to what you've used before. We have looked at those descriptors and we have translated them, if you like, into what you're used to seeing. So go to our Summer 2021 guidance, find the exemplification grading, and use that with your assessment grid. Can we have the 2019 boundaries link? If you write to Teaching Art and Design at pearson.com, I will send you the link after the presentation. I can't do that in this environment at the moment. I'm sorry, Alex.
Susan, I think I can do it at the moment, so that's fine. I can paste the link here for the particular attendee.
Yeah, I have one that I've just taken the notional components out for art and design, if it might make it easier, but it doesn't matter. If you want to send the one which has got all of them in, that's fine. I'm struggling to find exemplar materials for the GCSE and A-level art, craft and design title in the standard booklets. So exemplar materials for fine art photography and the endorsed title only. For GCSE and A-level, there are exemplars that cover most of the endorsed titles. So don't forget that the art, craft and design title is a title that allows you to use all the disciplines from right across the specification. So if you're doing under your A-level art and craft design or GCSE program, if you're doing painting and drawing, then look at the fine art exemplars, because the fine art exemplars have painting and drawing, and they're the same standard. The photography exemplars, if you do photography in A-level art, craft and design, then use the photography exemplars. Likewise, all of the others, you know, in your art, craft and design program that you have at school or college, you are picking the disciplines that suit your skills for delivery. If you're doing some pottery, then you can look at exemplars for 3D. If you're doing architectural design, you can try and find the 3D design materials. But GCSE art, craft and design, or A-level art, craft and design, isn't going to have any exemplars all of its own, because it is a course that's made up of all of the other disciplines. If you are the head of department and also the only art teacher, can a member of SLT provide the second signature sign-off? Yes, of course, if they are they're confident that you have followed all the processes and you can give them evidence that you followed all the processes, I don't see any reason why the SLT would not sign that off. So that's all that you would have to do for them. You would, they would obviously trust you, and you would show them the processes you've gone through to do that. How is this year's assessment approach, taking account of inconsistencies amongst the teaching cohort? Well, the inconsistencies, I presume you mean, are in grading. You would have, somebody would take the role of head of that. So if you've got a teaching team, then that person would be responsible for sampling those decisions and can change those decisions if they're a senior a line manager or whatever amongst that team. So there has to be standardization, and every teacher can be an internal verifier, if you like. I know that's a BTEC term, but it's the same sort of thing. It's the same thing for GQ. Everyone can look at anyone else's assessments and have an opinion, and it should be discussed. So if there are where you see inconsistencies, you need to take that up with your colleagues and all come to an agreement as to what the grade is for any particular learner where you deem there to be inconsistencies. That is why you have a teaching team. Other subjects have missed whole patches of learning. They're not being asked to cover every piece of missed work. Many will end the course without learning certain modules. Why are art students expected to cover everything? We haven't actually asked for you to get art students to cover everything. In the guidance, it states that, and in the Jcq guidance, it says that, we appreciate that there will be content that you haven't been able to teach. All that is being asked of art teachers is that you assess against the work that you have available, against the assessment objectives, and come up with a grade. And that evidence could be anything. It could be workshops, it could be research materials, it could be development sheets, it could be sketchbooks, it could be visualizations, it could be blogs, it could be absolutely anything. We haven't specified what our students are expected to cover. How likely are you to want evidence for art and design as part of your quality assurance? Some of you might have seen the latest from Ofqual. I haven't seen it in detail, but I understand that the process will most likely be focusing on maths or English plus one other subject from a centre. So considering that the maximum subject number from any centre would be 3, your centre may not even have its art and design looked at. And there are 3 boards taking part in that, the OCR, AQA and Pearson. So, you can work it out, that it'll be less than a third if that's the case. But the quality assurance is likely to be focused on any centres where any of the boards see discrepancies from previous years. That could be whether the marks have gone up or down this year in comparison to previous years, or just randomly. So the likelihood, I can't do the stats for that, but I'd say that if you are asked for evidence, there wouldn't be a huge amount of learners anyway, but you are, it's not a massive chance. Please could you clarify the role of the personal study this year? I don't know whether you asked this before I spoke about it in the frequently asked questions, but just when I look at what I told you about that one. The personal study is going to be is the same as the weighting as the same as any other particular element within the work that is being submitted, is being assessed holistically within that work. So it's just another element of work that will contribute to your final judgment. It's not got any percentage against it at all this year. If our students are chosen as a sample, as well as a portfolio of the students' work, are we expected to submit the assessment grids as well? I personally don't know what you'd be expected to submit for the random sampling, because that guidance hasn't been released yet by our assessment teams. So even I haven't seen that. So you will see that before the submission window opens, which is in a month's time, 26th of May. But I would do the process as normal, do the feedback, the marking against the assessment grids, because you are expected to do all the administration as you would normally. If a student appeals, for example, that's more important than random sampling. If a student appeals their grade, you would need to show where you have matched their work to a mark level, and then added those marks up in those assessment objectives and applied that mark to a grade. That is evidence of your process. If you don't do that, then you haven't got any evidence, and the student appeal, there would be probably issues with student appeals. So I would ensure that you have all the administrative things that you would, and the authentication form, as I said before. So. Will exam boards look at historic data of subjects as part of their quality assurance? We are not, I don't think Gosh has answered that. Yes, as part of qual requirements, yes, but this will be a general process.
Yes, what I meant by saying that, Susan, is that Ofqual requires our exam boards to look at the historic data of the outcomes of every center, and probably the data will be looked at subject level, but we will not be picking up on tiny differences in that data. It will be probably just the big significant discrepancies.
Lucy has asked, is it possible to grade each student based on the grade descriptors for each AO and then average the grade for the overall grade? No, we don't grade like that, even in normal years. You don't grade each AO. You give marks in each AO, and because they might have been better at research than at development, and so on. It's not a it's just not done in that way. So you need to find an accurate mark and then put it against the 2019 grade boundaries. You state that they're not appropriate as they do not relate to this year's Jcq grade descriptors. The grade descriptors are how you arrive at a mark. The grades boundaries tell you how the marks relate to grades. So they are appropriate. The boundaries do not relate to the grade descriptors the grade boundaries do not relate to the grade descriptors at all. You are marking using the grade descriptors. You're placing a mark in the assessment marks levels. Once you come up with a number, you will put that against the grade boundaries. It might be that you have a borderline mark when you look at the grade boundaries, in which case you could look at the grade descriptors again, the exemplified grades, to see which side of that grade boundary you think that they fall. And that's how you would use the exemplification. Please give us clear guidance on how to translate the assessment grid into current grades from the Jcq descriptors. That is the same thing.
Yeah, may I just Sorry, Susan, may I just say that in relation to that question, how do we translate our assessment grid and the level descriptors into Jcq descriptors or the other way around? We've got a very nice explanation and comparison of those, relationship between those in our exemplification material in A-level exemplars. So if you could relate to that and read through, that is very helpful and will explain how the grade descriptors from Jcq relate to our level descriptors on our assessment grid.
Somebody is saying that Tim stated that an A star would have been at 68, 69, but now you have posted on your grade boundary that would be 71, 72. Can you clarify? I'm afraid I don't have the grade boundaries here in front of me, and I'm not quite sure who you mean by Tim. Is that Tim Beasley? I don't really understand that question, I'm afraid.
It might be an old information from before the exams were cancelled.
Right.
It might be Tim Beasley who was leading on the art training sessions, I think towards the end of last year. So yeah, we do not apply any sorry, I lost my language now. Like you should just use the marks per personal study and per practical work as usual, and there is no scaling to be applied. That's what I want to say. Sorry.
Right. I think she just put the 3rd of March in there as well. So that was an event early on. I think that might have been before it had been decided that it was going to be teacher assessment grades.
Is it so?
Somebody has asked, personal study doesn't have to be marked as an individual piece related to component 1, question mark. That's right, separate marking sheets would usually be used, or a separate marking panel there. It's not the case this year. Just use it as a piece of evidence within the normal marking against the AOs. I think, Kosha, are you typing something in there?
Not anymore, Susan. You answered the question. Thank you.
If my students are in isolation, how do I get a physically signed authentication form from them? You can email them a form and just ask them to reply to your email that they have read the form and that they are, going to confirm that the work was their own. So you could just do it that way, as long as you have in writing that students are claiming that the work is their own. Because should plagiarism be discovered, then that's the clause that shows that they have, told you a porky pie. We have 10 students. Do we need to control the percentage of high grade and low grade? No, you're not controlling percentages. You are marking and grading against the evidence fairly, in fairness to all the learners. So you are not, playing any kind of mathematics game here at all. There's no algorithm. As I said before, you just mark what you see. It's quite possible that you have a cohort of learners that have very, very high grades. We're not saying that all cohorts of marks should have a certain percentage of, E to D and a certain percentage of C to B. That's not how it works. students are going to submit much weaker work this year as a result of lockdowns. How is the board going to address this in the grades? The board is not grading the work, you are. And you, when you say weaker work, you might be thinking that the work is because it's not finessed using the sort of equipment they would normally. So you're going to have to look at other aspects, such as their qualities of analysis, how they've used materials that they do have, because art design is a very creative subject, and it doesn't necessarily require tons of high tech. But we're not addressing anything. This is an exercise that teachers will do with the work in front of them. Caroline says, did you post the link for the grade boundaries? I don't know, Gosha, if you did. If
I
not,
am posting it for Caroline now, because it goes individually to...
Oh, it goes to individually. If you want anything afterwards, you can write to me at teachingartanddesign@pearson.com. Would you say that we should be more favourable with our marks for experimentation, as there would not be a wide range of experimentation with a wide range of materials? In which case you don't take a wide range into account. You mark them on the strength of what they have done with what they have got. So you can't be subjective by being favourable because they haven't had something, if you understand what I'm saying. Access to certain materials has been the same across the board for everybody this year. So even if they only had a pencil and some, a marker pen, they could have still done stunning work, analysed, researched, contextualised what they're doing, and so on. It isn't about the range of things that they've had to do the work this year. Lots of students have been at home and just working with, the odds and sods box and of throw-out materials or textiles, So it isn't, really you've got to try not to be subjective, but see who's used what they have got well. And if that is only pencils and paints, then that's not a problem, because they could still be very, very creative with those things. And that goes same for the question on, we've had students without internet access or access to materials at home. Again, even with limited materials at home, I don't know what your policy at school was, whether you sent sheets home with ideas or briefs, but that the approach, it's still consistency of access if you look at what they've done with what they have. And he's qualified that with, inconsistencies in the quantity and quality of engagement. The quantity and quality of engagement has been on and off for all students in the past 18 months. And that is something that it is very difficult. You've got a very difficult job at the moment, trying to deal with that. And the quantity of engagement is going to be far less than you had before, but it is, it is what it is. You have to look at what you've got, and assess that. You mentioned that centres would be disadvantaged students by collecting their work earlier. However, where centres feel they've completed projects across all the AOs, it wouldn't be disadvantaging. No, I didn't say that you couldn't stop earlier if you have enough evidence. This teacher said, our students have been working on a sustained project. They have sketchbooks, study sheets, and the final piece. That's great. But where centres are still trying to get some work out of learners, then their learners will be at a disadvantage if SLT are pushing for earlier grading. That's all I meant from that one. I was under the impression there were new grade boundaries from 2020. Are you saying we should ignore these and use only the 2019 boundaries? Yes, I'm saying you should ignore those. That is the advice from JCQ as well, that in 2020, the grade boundaries were for a completely different scenario than this year. So I don't know if Goshi wants to say anything on that, being in assessment, but the only reliable grade boundaries that JCQ suggests you use are 2017, if there was a series, 2018, 2019 are the only grade boundaries that have a similar situation. They have a component one boundary.
Yeah, that is correct. The autumn 2020 grade boundaries do not really apply to a wider cohort and into normal summer series, because the cohort was very small and it was not reflective on general performance of the candidates. So it should be ignored. It was an individual isolated case.
And it was component 2 as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's correct as well. Yeah, that makes a difference.
All right. None of the links work when I click on them. Is that if you mean the slide presentation? I understand from Ria that once you receive the PDF of the slides that they will. I think if you're trying to click in screen, they won't. You do not need to place students in a rank order as last year. Last year was centre assessed grades. This was a centre based activity because you were under lockdown from the 20th of March to the 31st of July. And that was a requirement. That was the only checking mechanism that was in place, was for exam boards to see rank orders and for that to be put in place. They were predicted grades, as I said before, of how students might have done had they been in school during that time and taken an exam. This year, students have been in and out of school, although we had small lockdown. It wasn't anywhere near as great as the March to July stoppage in the previous years. So the Department for Education this year have specifically stated that last year was predicted grades, this year is evidence-based grades. And you don't need to give them to us in rank order. It'll probably just be against the student. But again, I don't know what the system requirement is because that isn't in place yet. Can you confirm we must not share component 1 final marks and grades with the students? You definitely cannot share the grades. That is a JCQ absolute guideline. I wouldn't personally share the component 1 final marks because it's pretty easy to get the grades boundaries from the website. If anyone a student has a parent or anyone connected with education can probably get hold of those grade boundaries and they'll try and work it out. So the best thing to do is tell students what work you've used to give them their marks. But this year is a completely different year to previous years, and you're not allowed to share to that extent. It won't be helpful.
Susan, can I add to it? Actually, we had an internal debate about this, and we wouldn't recommend sharing the marks just because you can easily work out what grade the candidate would get from those marks. However, if you consider the submission for component 1 only as part of the evidence you've used. If you've used anything else, it doesn't mean that the mark definitely translates into the grade. So in a way, you can share the marks just for the candidate to know what mark they are at, and if they want to appeal that mark particularly, but you cannot give them the grades, if that makes sense. It seems a little bit complex and complicated, and we were having a bit of an argument over this internally, but yeah, you can, if you think it is something you can work around, you can share those marks, not the grades.
Somebody's just asked, can I just clarify that even though we have received the new grade descriptors, we are still required to use the original assessment grids and 2019 grades boundaries? If so, what is the purpose of the grade descriptors? The grade descriptors are not new grade descriptors. They are exemplification grade descriptors. So you should use your assessment grids and grade boundaries. But as I said before, if you need any extra help with that, the exemplified grade descriptors help you to better ensure that you're confident of the grade you're given, because as Gosh has said, the chief examiner has carefully tried to place those against the JCQ grade boundaries. So you use all of these things to get your mark, and then finally you can look at the 2019 grade boundaries. When you do so, as I said once before, that if you find that your mark is kind of dead on a boundary between two grades, and you don't know which way to jump with that, it isn't fair to any learners if you naturally jump to the higher grade. You need to go back and have a look to see if they're safely into the grade above the line between the two, or if they really are more safely in the grade just below that boundary. And all of those exemplification descriptors help you to make those decisions. We can't go on for too much longer, I'm afraid. There's a lot of questions. As I said, there's an awful lot of you. SLT requires our grades in 3 weeks' time. We might not be able to complete final piece and mark and standardise in 2 weeks' time. Again, take a look at what you think final piece should mean. Even if students only had 5 hours left, you can ask them to create a final piece, just as if they were doing, half an exam. Try and get them to, and the final piece, as I said, doesn't have to be a fully resolved, all singing, all dancing with bells on. It could be a finished visual, the completion of their project. So, give them some time to allow yourself to mark and standardise, but give them some time, a class or 2 classes, to produce, to let you know what their intentions were. You should keep the physical work until results day, or the digital work, sorry, because students might appeal, so you will need to have that evidence. I don't know, Gosia, do you think they should keep the physical work as well? We normally ask for it to be kept till the 20th of September.
Yes, but if in the case where the schools were closed and you wouldn't have that physical work on site, the candidates would have it with them at home and then share the digital evidence with the teachers for authentication purposes. And so you would have the digital only. So if you have the digital evidence, just keep that. You don't need to ask the students to bring the physical work to school, just to have it on site.
If you do have the physical work on site, just ensure that it's been digitized, and then you don't need to keep it any longer. But don't give any work back to students unless it's been digitized, because then you won't have anything for random sampling and you won't have anything if students appeal.
Indeed.
We don't need to take into account any other data like the other subjects are doing, just the project work we see. Yes, you are not looking at anything else, just your evidence. This is just your art and design work that you would normally look at. This is not an algorithm. It's not like last year. It's not trying to take into account anything else that the students are doing with their time. And you must put marks against all of the AOs. They are holistic in all of the work. When it comes to generating evidence for tags, would you suggest looking at the sketchbook as a whole or specific tasks example within? My centre is requesting 6 individual evidence points. Would you recommend using the final piece, a mark piece, and each AO 1 to 3? I don't. Well, I think what's happening there is the SLT are requesting evidence in the same kind of quantities, if you like, as if there were 6 individual pieces of evidence that they would be asking for in academic courses, you know, such as a report or an essay or a, you know, a quiz or whatever. With art and design, it's holistic, and I don't think that the bits can be taken out and produced as evidence points. So if they want to see the evidence, it will be the sketchbook and the final piece. It will be that project. It wouldn't be bits of that project, because that doesn't provide the evidence. The project as a whole. And what would you say about that, Kosia?
I'm sorry, I missed it. I think I lost you there. Which question was it? Sorry.
It was, Gemma, when it comes to generating evidence for tags, would you suggest looking at the sketchbook as a whole or specific task example within? My centre is requesting 6 individual evidence points. Would you recommend using the final piece, a mock piece, and each AO 1 to 3, because that obviously comes to 6. And the AOs, I've said that those things are not individual evidence points. They are, art and design is holistic.
Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't really understand why 6 points of evidence would be required at the centre, because, as you say, art is holistic.
Yeah, I think that's for the other subjects.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for art, you will have a different amount and different quantity of evidence for every candidate as well, because it does vary. So I would probably go back to the head of centre, whoever put that requirement forward, and argue against it, because you don't really need to have 6 points of evidence in art.
I'm afraid that we're going to have to stop in a minute, because the session, there are a lot of questions which you can write in the group chat. Is there a place, Gosia, to write my teaching art and design email address?
We can probably, can we add a question and then send it to all?
Yes,
possibly.
If you could do that. Somebody's asked, what could happen if sampling finds that a centre has been too lenient? Well, if we find a sampling has been too lenient, we would say so, and the marks would be remoderated by our examiner, and the marks would go up. You know, it's not that, if we, as I said, we're looking for marks that, if it's random sampled, we will random sample marks that are too low or too high. There's you know, things could go either way in a centre. We're not saying that everyone's going to be marking way too high, but if someone is marking way too low and we see any unfairness there, then that will be addressed.
Susan, I've added a question for your point of contact. If you would like to put your email address or the server and then send to all.
On the bottom, where have you put it on the top?
At the top, I think it's on the top.
Oh, it's such a long list. I'm afraid I no way I'm going to get through all of that.
Send to all when you answer it, so everyone can see.
Send to all. Okay, so I'm afraid that does bring us to the end of this session, and I will now pass you back to Ria to conclude the session, and thanks everybody for coming.